or anything. But then comes, like something called a Spring. What is that is called a Spring Boot, and which basically change the idea of, the Spring-based application development. How you develop the Spring-based application. Okay, that idea, this Spring Boot, completely changed. The Spring Boot completely changed, the idea of a Spring-based application development. Understanding, you think about a kind of Spring Boot is a path-breaking Spring around 2013-14. Okay, but this one was kind of providing a path for some newer technology on Ring ecosystem. That is platform. Okay, so Spring Cloud ecosystem. Okay, so there is a Spring Cloud, Spring Cloud. Okay, Spring Cloud. That is basically kind of developing the microservice best architecture. Like for that, Spring Cloud with Spring Boot is the combination. Are you getting? So most of the time you'll be finding Spring Cloud is much more realized on top of the Spring Boot. Are you getting? That's the reason I. And there are other things like something called as Spring Data. Like only meaning I'm listing out few major thing. Okay, what market okay, Spring Data. Okay, and like it's a lot of different things. I'll just give you little bit like more clarity. You see there, if you anyway go through this Spring.io. Okay, but if you just look into this diagram here, okay, you can understand particularly how the Spring framework is pretty much organized. It is even like not the complete list of the technologies or module on Spring, but if you try to kind of visualize, you'll be finding the ecosystem look like this. It's not just a little framework what we like heard say like in 2004, 5, 6, 7 on that time frame. When you say framework, we think like okay, it is some like initially Strauss basically brought idea of framework, right? So when Strauss says like from Apache, when we got Strauss, it's a Strauss framework. Okay, that is the first time kind of in Java community we heard about something called as framework. Okay, and when Strauss says like it is a framework, okay, we thought directly with Java server. Like okay, a little more sophisticated way of doing things. No, it has become kind of an ecosystem. It is a huge ecosystem on its own. Are you getting on? And it is having a huge set of technology to deal with. Such as if you look into on your data layer, like I mean, we think about like for any kind of data interaction, like whether you want to interact with SQL database or no SQL database, or dealing, like a huge batch project, like or a batch module, whatever you consider. Okay, but in Spring website, meaning Spring website, they used to say all these things as different projects. Okay, so Spring batch, Spring LDAP is a project. Are you understanding or not? So like on the data layer, depending upon what kind of a data store or what kind of store you are going to deal with, okay, or what kind of target you are going to deal with, there aren't technologies available. And remember, all these are like a framework on their own. Like you think about Spring Batch. So Spring Batch is you have to understand that. Like it's not to do a lot of coding. It's not like that. It's pretty much you'll be finding a lot of things readily kind of available, a lot of infrastructural thing, what you need for a batch process. Everything is mostly built in. Okay. And you just need to know like which component you need to use and know a little bit about the configuration and your job is done. Meaning every component, like play in a framework manner. Okay. So they themselves on their area, it's a kind of framework. Okay. They give you the things in a sophisticated way. Like like sophistication in accessing data from SQL-based data store or a NoSQL-based data store. Like Spring Data, a huge umbrella project which supports, like to work with any kind of relational database like the SQL data store, as well as kind of maybe more than 10 to 15. Itself is a huge project on its own. We call them as an umbrella project. It is having support, meaning like in order to access the data from a relational database using a JDBC flavor, using a JPA flavor, okay, using say like NoSQL for Mongo, for Neo4j, for Couchbase, like for different NoSQL, it is having like again the framework style solution, like in the Spring Data. Are you getting? Access, like the messaging system and Spring L, like to access any directory access. And each and everything on their own is a kind of framework you can think about. Are you getting Gana? Meaning they provide, meaning all of them are written on, many of them basically play with the Spring way. That means you got the same traditional like bean declaring, you have to define a bean, or you have to configure like one bean with another as a dependency. The same thing work there. But you have to understand like, okay, what kind of a batch thing is, right? Once you understand what is this batch kind of thing is, then you can possibly understand what are the different objects you need to work with and the different object what you need to configure with. Are you getting on it? And this is on your data layer, remember. And in the service layer, like particularly, you found the Spring Cloud. Okay, the cloud itself is again another umbrella project. It's contain a lot of different. Okay, but this is on your service layer. We'll look into anyway this one while you are getting into our disc. But on the service layer, the only thing what meaning like I'm not considering any. So there is no discussion regarding this. But at the same time, don't think like possible again, because it itself is a huge thing. Because if you think about every bit and byte, that's little kind of like complex, right? You cannot think about addressing every bit. But still, like like we'll be discussing the Spring Cloud on what your core framework. Okay, I'll take your question, guys. Like very uh, deployment are kind of little specifics. So we'll do that. Okay. So we'll be deciding like where we can deploy. Okay. I'll take your question. Don't worry, actually. Okay. So this common layer where you will be getting, like your regular core Spring stuff like your Spring AOP, Spring Web MVC, Spring Test, data access, a little bit Spring messaging support, and few more like the container. So this is what you learn as your Spring framework. That is the core framework. Are you getting on that? And those who have attended, like these things in some. Okay, maybe like 70 to 80% of this part Are you getting? And maybe more than that. I think you don't know only the test part and the messaging part. The messaging is a very small thing, but the test part we discussed. Okay, and web tier there is a lot of different technologies available. And the thing is, a lot of different technologies available. And the thing is, like Spring Headovers or Spring Web Services, Spring Session, Spring Webflow. These are very small thing. Okay, but the idea here is like you'll be finding one component called as Spring Security, which is kind of on its own a very what you find here. You'll be finding most of the thing what you find here. You will find some way kind of maybe like surrounded around the Spring Security. Okay, so these small thing we don't have in our list. As I said, like the small thing you can easily learn it on your own. So what is my target particularly is to catch those pieces, meaning like living those small thing, because in the rest of those small thing, like we don't want to come. Okay, so I know this many modules, this many projects. Instead, those area which are little heavy lifting thing, which are little complex kind of thing for someone to go for a self learning, like those are the area I'm targeting. Okay, to be much honest, to learn. Okay, but those things, like those things, you can easily handle on your own. If you sit one weekend or something, you can handle something like Spring Social. You think about this is matter of like an hour or two. You know, you can really tackle that one. The workflow, if you're having a Spring Web or WebMVC idea, the workflow you can understand. If you're sitting, like on your own, like for a week, like after you learn your advanced Spring, if you want to make a kind of a completeness on the Spring, still you have to spend those small things. Are you getting? But our ultimate target is concentrating those big things. Okay, those big things. Module for you people. But let us kind of look into is our content, and on top of that, one module I'll be adding. Okay, so particularly pick up the thing from the data layer. Okay, so to understand is that like we provide those big things. Okay, a lot of small thing like we ignore because kind of home, like you can spend little time. I'm very clearly giving you the idea. Like here, the big thing you can understand also. Like Spring Batch is a big thing. It's not something you can think about self learning. I mean to say you can do a self learning, but the thing is like you have to spend a more time. Like you may spend if you're going in a irregular kind of thing, then you may need like 2 months. If you are just spending 1 hour, then possibly 2 months if you sit, right? So same goes for the Spring Data, same goes for cloud, like same goes for the security. Are you getting it? So that is where we are targeting this big component. Okay, so what we are going to discuss here in our advanced Spring is like one is the Spring Boot, the very much the required thing what you have seen here. It basically provide the platform for your Spring Cloud. Basically, Spring Cloud is built on top of I can say the Spring Boot. Kind of module. Okay, then, taking you towards Spring Data. Spring Data, what you are seeing from the like on your data layer. The Spring Data. This one. Okay, that means you can understand which technology fit. Are you getting on? And that, again, boot is one of the infrastructural thing. Actually, boot is something kind of like sit in the bottom. Okay, so that will fit into everything. So then the Spring Data, then we'll be having Spring Batch again, which is again coming from this data layer, like which is providing you the way for doing those long running batch processing kind of thing. Okay. So that is what. And then we'll be discussing Spring Data, Spring Batch. Then we'll be discussing something called as Spring Security. Remember, these are kind of big fish kind of thing, as I said, and Spring Security. And then we'll be discussing like Microservices principle. So we'll be talking about like what is microservice versus a monolithic, so the requirement of the microservice architecture, the different design approach associated, so that kind of thing with microservice. Okay, and then like we'll be discussing like microservice based. Okay, but for you, like this is our content. Let me clarify. Okay, most of the things I mentioned, but anyway, the workflow is not in our curriculum. This is basically uh, kind of like we're not considering. Okay, it's basically web MVC kind of thing. Okay, so but we're not discussing. So here, because I want to have the idea, like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm considering one thing, okay, like from your data layer. Okay, I think we can even think about making it complete. Okay, so we may consider Spring LDAP, or you can consider one. I'll be considering. So let's consider like into your messaging kind of thing. Okay, so this will give you kind of like a flown idea about your pretty much like a complete idea. Uh, from your service layer, you got the cloud with the microservice design principle. You got the security, which is kind of the heart and soul. 1 second, man. I'll take your question. I'll take your question. Don't worry. Okay. Spring security is basically like the heart and soul here. If uh, so we spend most of the thing with many the associated with Spring security. But once you learn the spend little time to tackle this small thing, like so yeah. So if you can just do that, okay, that will be a little easier. Okay, so this is what the content we are covering. Okay, and the Spring Boot, which is basically kind of the current trend requirement, meaning they're pretty much asking like the about the Spring Boot. Are you getting? Okay, so this is some about something like regarding the content. But if you have any question or anything, you can now ask. Yeah. So anyone having a question regarding this content, you can just raise them. Before that, like just to interact, like so, guys, are you first of all satisfying this core Spring requirement? We'll do that. We'll do that.
Yes, sir.
All of you are satisfying, right?
So, sir, in the industry, what other things are used in the Spring? This is all right.
Things what I list out, like these are like headers, Spring Web Services, in some context, Webflow, Spring Social. Here and there, you'll be thinking these things are basically getting used. Okay, so if you can just tackle these things on your own little bit, that will be really good. Okay, if you can tackle these things, these are meaning why I'm saying these are not big things; these are very small things. Okay, so if you can just spend little kind of pretty much comfortable with the current market requirement, you know. Oh,
Spring Web Services
hmm.
you'll cover
Spring Web Service I don't have in the list actually.
because that is very important, sir.
Okay. time leap where we'll do. One second. I'll come to that. Spring Web Service. This is basically, if you say we can plan this one, okay, we can plan this, but still I'm not guaranteeing. But it's a very small thing. Actually, you should go through a web service learning curve, like what is that is called the uh, contract first web service implementation, like your Jackson. But if you want that, I can just do that. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Like Satyendra, we have on our list. Okay. So Learn, Eureka, Cloudburst, most of them, but I cannot say specifically. But yeah, I think yeah. Netflix, Eureka, Ribbon, like in Gateway. Uh, I don't know about the turbine, whether it is in our list or not. But cloud things will be seeing actually, because most of these things what you're asking, like these are the fundamental of your microservice architecture. These are actually the microservice design goal kind of thing. Like when you're going for microservice based architecture, you are forced with certain thing, and whatever you are asking, they are basically those things like service discovery, like the gateway, like circuit breaker. All these things are kind of the design requirement, but the only thing could be like I may have my choice of technology there, like so pretty much everything is on our list. You getting on? Okay. And time leap, Salim, time leap. Why we need here? Like we don't have anything in ours right now where we need the time leap. Actually, if you could have like asked that one here, along with the web MVC. When we are doing the web MVC, it is where plan, but anyway, whatever it is. This one have been planned here. Okay, so in the advance, we don't have kind of a context for that. Okay, but if you say like just to write one example, because in Spring Boot, I'll show you how to kind of integrate with, how to write a web application using Spring Boot. That is where we make that. But Timeleaf is basically fit on this web MVC particularly. When you're writing a MVC-based application, you may use Timeleaf as your templating engine. Okay, so that fit on this stack, but not here. You got my point? Okay, yeah. Others, man, any other question you have? Such that we can finalize the thing. How many hours? Yeah, so this will be basically around like 2 months to be much honest. Okay, because everything, the big thing, as I said, like it's a huge stuff. Okay, so maybe like about 2 week of time, and let me just go like Spring Boot. You think about 1 2 week. Spring Data. You think about like maybe 10 sessions, about like 7 to 8 sessions. Like MQP, you think about like 3 to 4 sessions or something. And cloud, you think about like 10 to 2. Architectural discussion, you think about 3 to 4 sessions. 30, 40, 50, maybe close to 60 hours of discussion. Getting on to close to 60 hours of discussion. Are you getting? I think like if everything the thing is like actually it is a 1 hour session, right? So 6 to 7. So on that we basically, because you cannot do every 1 hour exactly. We'll be kind of doing every day like 50 to 55 minutes of session, right? So that is where like it's I think it's something like you think about. Okay, you are just sitting 1 hour and you're gathering some content, and it's pretty much kind of enough content for that day if you are really practicing. I have to go for this advanced content because of the job opportunity or the market demand. or your current job requirement. So you think like, okay, so 2 months, like not a lot of load on every day. Instead, like a balanced kind of workload. Just read some documentation, some specification, take this example and play with that. So basically, you have to write the thing, okay? Because these are advanced thing, and it basically need like a lot of basic understanding, like particularly on the Spring security area or in the cloud. Like should have some prerequisite. Meaning, I'm not asking like what we are going to teach, but we expect like the prerequisite. Like when you are getting into the Spring security, uh, it becomes kind of like a lot of technical things like you must understand the HTTP better. You should understand the different HTTP authentication mechanism, like the HTTP basics. What is exactly meaning? If I suggest like okay, you read out a little bit about HTTP basic, you should do that. Like otherwise, what happen is uh, many things like particularly in security and cloud and the batch area, this three area where you'll be finding everything looks very much surprising because you will be encountering, meaning if you never work with the bats, first time like you will be hearing few term, right? So better like you just read out few documentation, Wikipedia page, just develop little idea, develop little things. When develop that, like when I'm talking in a Spring specific way, you'll be catching up, like you'll be comparing that generalized idea about the batch processing to Spring style batch processing easily, and you can move forward. Okay, but particularly I found students don't trainer is going to see. This is where the gap being created. Like I'm expecting, so like in security area, a lot of like you have a basic idea about OAuth. So we're saying OAuth, you should have the idea. You should not have the Spring based implementation of OAuth, or you should not have like a Spring based implementation of SAML, or a Spring based implementation using UCAR Bros or using LDAP. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking like develop little like idea about how is OAuth, how it works. Like a little bit one video if you watch, like if you read out certain content, you'll be getting some idea. If because if you have that idea, you'll feel very much comfortable when I'm talking. Otherwise, what happens is every term looks new to you. That is where the confusion starts. Okay, and will force again I have to go for that one because I have a doubt like okay whether you picked up or not. So basically, don't understand like when I say just read out little thing, they think like okay, so I have to again read out this thing. No, not this thing. The kind of supporting the terminal, particularly in these things in the advanced Spring for batch, for security, and for cloud, you have to gather some idea. Okay, and it will be really helpful for us to move forward. Are you understanding? Okay, so any other question? Oh, okay, where I think I work on this kind of area. I will say actually. Because in regular Spring kind of thing, these things we are not using. What deployment platform will you use? What do you mean by that? Now there is no project kind of thing. To be honest, like there is no project. Okay, so it's about like the technical discussion, like live coding, all in front of you. Okay, but we will not kind of because we don't promise that because project is a different view from different. So I understand what is your view about project. Okay, so we will not never entertain that thing because that's a very confusing thing. So like people say, okay, so we'll be sitting for 10 days and doing something. We don't have that kind of thing. So whatever the concept we are discussing, like on that particular concept, like we'll be seeing some code and putting into tracking you the code. I think there are many students which are kind of like already attended our code. So everything is guys. Any other question? Okay, so I think leaving few of how many of you are working actually? Clearly working on any of. If I start with Abdul, are you working? No? Hello? Okay. How many of you are working guys?
I'm working from.
Which
Not now,
technology?
but yeah.
Which technology you use? Okay.
So we're
And
using Java and Java Spring Boot also for one of our application, and the other the IT network.
so yeah, okay. I think Marinda, Okay, what about Pradeep, Ravikant, Satyendra, Atul? No? Uh-huh. Okay. Oh, okay. Come on, Satyendra. Actually, Satyendra is actually. Okay. Because if you are a student, you never know actually all those terms, right? What are the technology you are using? Pradeep is working. Ah, okay, I understood. But what technology you are using? Okay, so you guys understood the content. Okay, Spring MVC. Yeah, fine. Okay. So you understood the content what we have, right? So this is the content we are going to work with. Okay. So if you don't have much question on these things, then tomorrow I'll be starting with the Spring Boot. And one thing, yeah, have a little bit like a Maven background. Like that's necessary. Not hardcore requirement. Like if you follow along, you can understand. But in many different contexts, you'll be encountering kind of using few um, like you can just spend little time on Maven, kind of those who are interested, like make sure you're looking into Maven and like uh, on YouTube you can just spend like 2 to 3 hours, and that will be little helpful. Okay, so tomorrow I'll be just giving you the background about the boot. So you may got like 1 or 2 days or weekend even you can sit for and having a little background regarding the Maven. Okay, that do this particular one because we use Gradle. If anyone kind of a Gradle guy, like I cannot do anything. But I think if you are a Gradle guy, you are easily understanding Maven, right? So yeah, that is one prerequisite kind of thing along with the course. Okay. Someone joined at the end actually, but I cannot. Oh, the books are. Okay. So any question you'd like to raise, or we can just wrap up for today?
No, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay then. So I'll discuss. Okay. You guys.